All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
What up, horror heads, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa.
And we are back, baby. It has been a while. I have had a couple of rough Wednesdays. Anyone who was waiting for us to do The Nun 2 weeks ago, literally the minute I went to log on to the stream here, my webcam just completely quit. And then, as you're wont to do, the next day when I went to get it fixed, it was working just fine. So we're thinking we're going to be back the following week. Last week, storm comes through, absolutely destroys a fence. 2 dogs get loose. I'm just trying to fix it, keep them from running away. That ended up taking me all
in the middle of the storm.
Yeah, basically. That ended up taking me all Wednesday night. And so it has been a journey to get here. And we know The Nun 2 has been out in theaters for a little while now. We had this plan to come out right as it was released. We try. We really do. But if you are joining us tonight, it is because we are going to review The Nun, released in 2018, a spinoff of the Conjuring universe. One of the things out there that is, it's just passé now. You've got to create an entire, universe around one movie that does well. And the
shared universe.
Shared universe. There we go. The Conjuring has done this and brought us many a horror, some good, some bad, some haunt your dreams. What about The Nun, Dave? Take us through this, man. Does it stick with you?
So, this is an odd one because I think I very rarely change my tune when it comes to movies. When I like them, and when I don't, I don't. And I have often gone back and rewatched movies that I didn't like. And I was like, man, I was wrong. That happened to me with What We Do in the Shadows.
Right.
I guess I was in the wrong mood when I first saw it, and I saw it and I was like, this is garbage. I didn't laugh. I laughed twice. Both times were with the werewolves, and they're not the focus of the movie.
And it's not their movie.
No. And then I saw it again years later, and I was like, man, what the fuck was I on? Because that's awesome.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of happened here. As a huge fan of Juan and his Conjuring universe, I was on board with this because The Conjuring 2 is incredible, and arguably the scariest part of the movie is Valak.
Right.
And she blew me out of the water in that movie. And so I was like, man, this thing is going to be fantastic. And I remember going to see it and being really disappointed. And I was like, man, I don't get it. Like, she was, to me, not scary. I remember thinking there was one scene I really liked, which was the first night that they're in the Abbey. And I was like, that was great. Everything else was kind of just meh. And so when you brought this up, like, hey, let's do The Nun because The Nun 2 is coming out. I was like, okay, well, yeah, that's the time to do it. But I wasn't excited about revisiting this one. Like, literally any other Conjuring movie, I'm down all the time.
Right.
Even La Llorona. I love that movie. So
he's got to.
I know I'm in the minority there. As I am in the podcast. Our podcast Latino here. So wow, was I fucking wrong about this movie. Is it great? No, I will say that. I don't think it's great, but it is really good at what it does. And for me, this movie is almost like a modern Hammer horror. And I don't know why I didn't view it that way when I saw it, because I was deep in a Hammer horror binge when I saw this movie. And it just didn't do it for me when I saw it the first time. Seeing it again now, I was like, wow, what the fuck was I on? Because this, to me, it hit all the beats that it needed to hit.
Yeah, I remember when I suggested this, and you're like, "Yeah, fine, I'll watch that piece of shit again." Right? Like that was like your exact reaction. I'm pretty
That
sure.
was it.
And this was one I had this was my first time seeing this one actually, because I start to get wary of like spinning off such like a minor character. Like I had watched all the Annabelle movies, and so when this one came out, I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I need this universe to get any bigger. I don't know. And then it just kind of fell by the wayside, and I never watched it. So then a couple weeks ago, we were getting ready to do this episode. Finally, sat down and watched The Nun, and it's scary, man. It's got some great moments. Yeah, there are definitely some negatives here, like you said. Is it good? Yes. Is it great? No. But I mean, it has got some shit that sticks with you. I really ended up enjoying this movie a lot more than I thought I would, even once it had started. What's really funny is, as I was looking back through my notes prepping for tonight, there's like a distinct line in my notes where you can tell that I went from just watching to kind of tear the movie when we got onto the podcast to genuinely enjoying myself.
Right.
Because my notes changed from jokes and making fun of things that happen to like, oh, make sure you talk about this.
Yeah.
And so it's a movie that takes you on a really interesting ride. Like you said, it is very Hammer horror-esque. And so just like with a Hammer horror movie, a lot of times when it starts, if you're not in the right mindset, you get into this and you're going, what the hell? Like, why
Yeah.
any of this makes sense? Why should I care about any of this? And then you can consciously or unconsciously make the decision to just go along for the ride at a certain point. And especially if you're new to Hammer horror, that is a very odd experience. And sometimes it's real easy to make that decision. Like when you go back and you watch those Hammer horror Dracula movies, real early into it, it's real easy to decide, you know what? Okay, let's go. I see what you're at. Let's do it. Sometimes it's tougher. When we did Captain Kronos, right? I didn't know if I was going to be able to buy in to that ride.
It's a lot to buy into.
And so you eventually kind of find that moment where you either settle in or don't. And I did settle into this movie, and I ended up really enjoying it. There's a lot of good takeaways here. There's a lot of things that could have been tweaked a little more, or a few things that could have been tweaked a little less, that would have made this movie better. But I think that it has some genuinely scary moments. I think that it has a creep factor that does really kind of settle in. There's
it's an atmosphere.
There we go. Atmosphere. There's a feeling to this movie that really kind of sticks with you. And you get, once you're into that and you kind of immerse yourself in the world of this convent, nunnery, cloister, whatever the right word I'm looking for here is. Once you kind of immerse yourself in that and you let it become everything that is your experience in that, then you start to notice things that are just kind of in the background and creepy, or you start to let all those setting things really start to affect you, instead of just watching for, like, well, where's the nun? Like once you start to experience the whole movie, there's a lot of really good stuff to take away from. And I know that you have Catholic school experience, correct?
I do. Yeah. In fact, most of my education was in Catholic school.
Right. And so, I mean, does that add an element to this at all? Like just having that experience?
I think it does, because while I don't consider myself Catholic anymore, I'm not devout. I'll attend mass every now and then, when I have to. Culturally, I'll always be Catholic. If it's a part of your history, it's there always, right. And I attended Catholic elementary school, Catholic high school, Catholic college.
Okay.
And I'm even doing a master's degree right now through Boston College, which is a Catholic Jesuit university.
Right.
So, like, and I work at a Catholic high school, you know, so like I can't escape this. It's part of my, it's part of the fabric of who I am, you know, whether or not I subscribe to, you know, the dogmatic beliefs. And I was taught by nuns. When I was in elementary school, I very briefly attended a school, very famously down here in Miami, that where a nun was actually murdered
Oh,
by
shit.
a monk who had fallen in love with her.
Oh my
It was
God.
the strangest thing. You can look it up. It was called Holy Cross Academy, and it is just the wildest story. And it's weird to talk about it that way because, like, you know, she was a person, you know,
Right.
and so is he, and so it's like it's a terribly sad and unfortunate story, but it's exactly the kind of thing that you think of when you think of the nun, you know, where it's like, you know, there's something wrong in this place, and I did feel that way in that school. It was very weird. You know, and I one of my very first teaching jobs was at a school run by nuns, and it was odd. It was odd. And you know, conversely, I work at a school run by not a group of priests, but you know, religious brothers, and it's a totally different environment. I mean, these are
Right.
the most laid back guys you've ever met. They're so cool. Like they'll open up a bottle of whiskey in their office and like say, "Hey, you got to sit down. You got to try this thing. It's fantastic." You know, so there's all sorts of different, I think, sects when it comes to Catholicism, but that image of a nun who is very angry and wants to dole out, you know, Catholic justice
Right.
is one that I think, if you're familiar with it, drums up all sorts of trauma.
And you know what's really interesting to me about watching this movie and the whole thing essentially taking place in this convent is it took a little bit for me to get immersed in there because while I have Catholic family, I was not raised Catholic.
Mhm.
And so nuns are almost a foreign concept to me. Like I know what a nun is. Like I get it, right? It's a woman who's married to God and she stays chaste and this is her life and that's what she does and she devotes herself to service and you know I understand what a nun is. But I also understand what Lithuania is and if I went there I'd have no idea what was going on, right? Like I
Right.
know it's a country. That is
The
where
great way
I
of putting it.
thank you. Um, that is where I fell into this weird place of uncomfort, discomfort
Mhm.
while watching this movie, but it added to how scary it was. And that was because I didn't have any frame of reference for some of these things that they were talking about or for some of these things that were just happening. The idea that there's just always a person praying in this one thing. Now, the movie did lead me to believe that's not a common thing in a convent. It's just
Right.
something that this one does. But just the idea, like I went and looked it up, and there are convents where that exists.
Yeah, it's
Where
called perpetual adoration.
yes,
Yeah.
that blew my mind. Like did you have an 8-hour shift where you're just on your knees praying? I would assume in Latin a lot of the time, right? Like,
Well, and that time, yeah, it would have been. You know,
yeah.
it was the late 40s or early 50s. I can't
I've
remember.
got 1952.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
and so like that type of stuff, it adds to how creepy this is because it becomes it becomes a stranger in a strange land type
Mhm.
thing added on where I'm now suddenly immersed in this world that I know very little about. Look, I'm put it on one hand what I know about Catholicism, right? Like Mary's a big deal. You pray to
Yep.
her.
Huge. Yeah.
You do confession,
Mhm.
right? That's a thing. Rosaries,
Yep.
those are and you call it mass. And their weddings are super long. There we go. There's my 5
Ridiculously
things.
long. There's no
So
need for
long.
them to be this long.
So long. There's the 5 things I know about Catholicism. And so I'm now just completely immersed in not only an environment where everything around me plays into this, but every character is deeply, deeply embedded in this world. And so it ends up becoming a thing where I can't ever predict what's going to happen because I'm learning what's happening a few seconds after it happened, and I'm starting to put pieces together. And so while there's that element of what you have where it's dragging up things from your past and you're associating it with that, the other side of that coin is if this is completely foreign to you, it really does add something to the movie that makes it scarier and creepier, and I really enjoyed that.
That's a fantastic point, and it's a thing that I don't really consider, and I think that most of us don't really consider this when we watch movies. It's just like we bring our own life experience into these things, and they are what they are for us. And while I can watch a movie and then think to myself, well, it wasn't for me, but I know that that's something that someone else can enjoy.
Right.
I don't often think about why it is that that's something else that someone can enjoy. And I think context is one of those things too. I was reminded of something that Linda Blair said about the making of The Exorcist, where she said that and The Exorcist is one of those things where Catholics know what an exorcism is from a very early age because they're performed all the time. And
Right.
and it's not something like the way that it's performed in The Exorcist, but exorcisms are performed at baptisms. They're performed in masses. They're performed all the time, and nothing spectacular ever happens.
Right.
It's just part of the religious rite. And she talks about how Linda Blair, when she was making The Exorcist, for her, it was a fantasy film because she didn't grow up Catholic. She grew up Lutheran or something like that. And she, for her, the devil was a fictional character.
Right.
He was just that dude from the book. He was not someone you needed to be afraid of, because if you believed in God, you went to heaven, and that was it. So I think there's the Baptist concept of grace.
Yeah.
And that's something that, like, I had never considered, because I saw The Exorcist and I was like, oh, it's the fucking devil, that's the big bad.
Yeah.
And lots of people are watching it like, oh, this is great, this is fantastic, and the devil is nothing more than just Megatron to them. Not in 1973 when it comes out. Megatron hadn't been invented yet, unfortunately.
Right.
But you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I think that that's such an interesting concept where it's like, this thing means something to me, and it means something entirely different to you because it's only the context that the movie's giving you.
Yeah, exactly. Everything I had to go on was delivered to me in this package. So I'm literally building the car as I'm going along for the ride. Like I'm just picking up whatever I can and trying to keep this thing running. And that, while it was exhausting, it really did add to how scary it was, because there was never a moment where I felt like I knew what was going to happen, because like I didn't have enough context. I'm sitting there wondering why this dude doesn't think it's creepy that some ridiculously old woman is talking to him without uncovering her face.
Right.
And then I go and look it up, and it's like, oh, that's not that uncommon, right?
Standard
like that's
rules.
Yeah. And it was like, it's like, because I'm sitting there like, obviously this woman is not who you think she is, or she'd show you her face. And I go and look it up. It's like, oh no, they don't show their face all the time.
Yeah.
Word. Like,
sign of humility.
Yeah, like that type of stuff. It kept me on my toes, and I enjoyed that.
Well, and I think we're starting to get close to story. So in a section that we're calling a reading from the gospel according to Valak, it's weird because I feel like there's a lot going on in the story here, and yet there's nothing going on in the story here. And
Remarkably accurate way to put it.
Yeah, it's so strange because there's so much here, and yet there's so little. Is there anything about this story of basically Sherlock Holmes and Watson strolling into a convent, which is basically The Name of the Rose, which, if you've never seen that movie or read that book, the movie stars Sean Connery as basically Sherlock Holmes strolling into a convent where there's been a murder. It's fucking spectacular. I think it's Christian Slater's very first movie. It is so good. Right?
Okay.
Anyway, I got sidetracked. Sorry. Now I was thinking Name of the Rose. The book's by Umberto Eco. It is the most complicated fucking book you've ever read, and it is spectacular. Anyway, this Sherlock Holmes and Watson stroll into this abbey, and they're investigating what is apparently the suicide of a nun,
Right.
and then Scooby-Doo antics ensue.
Yep.
So is there anything that for you worked particularly well? Anything that you still find confusing, or was this one of the aspects of the movie you're like, yeah, no, this is fucked?
So I think that for the idea of this storyline being so simplistic, I think it kind of plays into the fact that the creators of the film kind of acknowledge that a lot of people who were going to be watching this were going to be like me, and they were going to kind of be figuring out some of the ins and outs of this. And then also I've got to assume that Catholicism has at least kind of changed in 70 years, right? So
it has actually.
Yeah.
And very shortly after this movie takes place, and this is some just Catholic history for you. The Second Vatican Council took place, and it changed a lot of the rules, which were like old school rules that go back like hundreds and hundreds of years. So a lot of things changed very shortly after this movie was made.
There's another thing about Catholicism. Like, you just got this one dude and he says stuff, and so it is written, so it shall be done. Right. You know, like,
and he is, according to the big book, infallible.
Right, exactly. So
whatever he says, it goes.
2 popes ago, he's like, you know what? Purgatory is not a thing anymore. And everybody's like, okay. Anyway, so, I think that you, even the Catholics that are watching this, they had to, they're still learning kind of how some of this stuff works too. So you front load a lot of that stuff. And then what you do is you stretch out this very kind of thin story, and you rely on your actors' performances. You rely on a lot of special effects. Yeah, the story here is absolutely nothing fantastic to write home about. You called it Scooby-Doo antics, and I mean, you're on it. There are plenty of scenes in this where you're just watching something happen, and then it's over, and it's over. Right. And that then you move past that moment. There are plenty of times where the camera's just panning just because it just looks creepy around there. And they just want you to get that feel. There's not a ton to this story. However, there is some really good demonology and things that get worked into the story in a way that make them highly accessible.
I was hoping you'd go here.
And so they very briefly kind of address the idea in The Conjuring 2, where we were first introduced to the nun, the idea that if you have the demon's name, you have power over them. And so they went deeper into that, where it didn't just become the idea of having the name and the power is turned over to you like that, which in my interpretation of reading a lot of these things isn't how it was ever supposed to be meant. What you get is you get a priest who gets the name, and so now he has the power to figure out what this demon's all about. It's not just that the name gives you authority over, it's that having the name allows you to do the research and put in the work and figure out what this demon's all about, and then know your enemy. And it becomes that type of thing. So we get these really great scenes where he's flipping through these ages old illuminated manuscripts, and he's scrolling through all of this stuff, just reading about Valak, because he's going to go into battle prepared. That part of the story I loved. I loved the idea of this whole thing being built around, a certain spot for a certain reason, because there are things like this that happen. If you've ever read about I've always said Gegis, but I think it's Gagis Codex, also known as the Devil's Bible. When you delve into the history of that, you can see where some of the parts of this story actually came from. There is an area where the earth cracked open, and they were convinced that that these devils were coming out, and so they literally built a inward facing castle around this spot so that they could be vigilant and that nothing would ever come out of it and terrorize the world. And so you're getting these really good pieces of what are accurate historically or literarily accurate demonology type things, and I really enjoyed that. Surprising no one, that's what I walked away from really loving here, was that while you get horror movies that have demons and things all the time, and like I said, even when we kind of meet who Valak is in the Conjuring 2, the way that Valak is beaten and sent back is still just kind of glossed over. In this one, we get that really good idea of delving into how all of this is not just scary because she looks scary and she's terrorizing people, but we learned that she's scary because culturally she is beyond a monster, because she's not just there to torture people. We get this story of understanding that she is a foretelling of things to come, because if she is allowed to be free on earth, then everything that follows is going to be worse. We're not just fighting this one thing, we're fighting the end of the world, which they tiptoe around without ever really deliberately saying those are the stakes, but making it very well known that those are the stakes. One of the things that always, in my opinion, has made the Japanese version of just about any movie that's been remade in America better is the fact that in that Japanese version, there are high stakes that you understand if you understand the culture. And that is
and there's lots of cues, like with music and stuff that like is going right by us.
Right. Those are the stakes that they established in this movie. Even if you were learning the culture associated with it as you watch this story, then you got the opportunity to fully understand that exorcisms don't just happen because a demon is a danger to that person. Exorcisms happen because a demon is a danger to the world. Because every time one of them is free, that tips the scales a little bit more to the evil side. So these things aren't just a threat to your one loved one. If this demon is allowed to continue, they're a threat to the world. And this movie established those stakes amazingly well. That was one of the most
that whole side story with Daniel, I think is so great, because you see how I guess the dichotomy of where the church stands on it as an organization, where it's like, hey, you stopped this this demon infestation into our world, but then the torment that Father Burke feels at losing Daniel, you know, that's to me that's one of the best things about this movie. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, man.
You know, to me, this story is about as close as we've gotten in many years to a Hammer horror film. And I know I said that at the top of the hour. And I know that Hammer had a resurgence many years ago. You know, The Woman in Black.
The Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe, right?
Yeah, Daniel Radcliffe. Yeah. It was great. It was, and that's a movie that I would love to do at any point on the podcast. And I've never even considered it until right now, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it in a while.
But wow, what a great movie. And it did feel like a Hammer horror movie. I think the only other movie that comes to mind is maybe Crimson Peak.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that has a very Hammer feel to it. And it's just that, like, I guess the gothic thing is played out.
Yeah.
And this movie feels like gothic horror to me. And, you know, and it's partly by design, because it takes place in an abbey that was built in the Middle Ages, you know. But to me, that is all of the stuff that's going into what makes what you put so perfectly. It's creepy. It's
Yeah.
really creepy. For me, it's an atmospheric horror that you don't find too much anymore, which I think we find in a lot of Mike Flanagan's work, where like it's not about the jump scare. There's one jump scare in The Haunting of Hill House, and it's spectacular.
Oh, and it's
It is
fucking
really, really
terrifying.
good.
Yeah.
It's great. I call it the greatest jump scare in the history of jump scares.
Oh, so good.
However, that's not what you think of when you think of that show. It's the psychological horror that's going on there. And I think that what this movie does so well is the Abbey feels not like a real Abbey, but it feels like that Abbey. And to me, it's taking place in this weird dreamscape that the Hammer horror films took place in. It's such a weird sort of like realism that's happening in this movie, where and they're not doing it by putting the camera out of focus. They're not doing it by using weird lighting or anything like that. It just feels dreamy. It feels like a nightmare, like those nightmares where like nothing quite makes sense and you're trying to make sense of it and you're like, but I just don't understand why this is happening. And yet you're terrified in that nightmare. And that's what's going on here, where like, do they perfectly explain everything that's happening in this movie? No. And yet the abyss does not become any less scary.
Right.
Why is she there? The evil is seemingly coming out of that one locked room. Why would she be there? Why would all those nuns suddenly appear in that room when Thaisa Farmiga's praying? Right. They shouldn't. In fact, no one should be there. And yet the evil is seeping out somehow, and it's never explained. And I'm okay with that. Are there really zombies there? Or was that just, again, mind games? I don't know, and I don't care. Because to me, that's exactly what this movie was going for, is that dreamscape that I think it accomplished very, very well. To me, it feels exactly the way it's supposed to feel. The side story with the town, I feel like, is something that people can very easily harp on. Where it's like, well, why are we going back to the town? We just need to see Frenchie come back and like save the day.
Which in spades, what a hero moment.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic moment. I'm glad that everyone survives.
Right.
To the extent that he does, because they tie it into that first Conjuring, and I think that that's a nice way to tie the whole universe together. But the moment where he's in the bar and they're talking about how they just buried, someone's daughter, that something needs to be done about the Abbey up the road. To me, that is where the real magic in this movie is.
Yeah.
Because I think that as much as that Hammer and that old school Universal feel was present throughout the whole movie, it was never as present as it was in that one scene. That scene added nothing to the greater story. And yet, to me, that's where the beauty of the story is. It's in the people. And I think that that's something that Universal and Hammer understood. I think that that's something that somehow got lost in the 70s as we started getting, or in the 80s as we started getting into like the slasher and stuff like that, where things became more about the killer instead of about the people being killed.
Right.
You just needed fodder for that machete, and I'm okay with that because I like that kind of movie too. But there's something about seeing a bartender who clearly has had this bar in his family for generations, the same shotgun hanging over his, over the bar that's been there for years, the guy crying in the corner because he's just buried his daughter, the woman who's crying in another corner because her son just died, that sort of like real town environment that's happening.
Right. And again,
to me, that's the magic of the story.
Again, establishing stakes that now we're not just watching Father Burke, fight to just protect him and his people he's fighting to save this town,
Mhm.
and if it can leak out into that town, it can continue.
Mhm.
We mentioned Sherlock Holmes, we mentioned Scooby-Doo. One thing about the story that was really funny to me is we get an Indiana Jones moment there too.
Yeah.
When suddenly it's like, oh, Mary's pointing the way, and there's the beam of light, and they got to like
Yeah.
dig the ancient talisman out, that has the actual blood of Jesus in it and stuff like that.
What a great Deus Ex Machina.
Right?
It's like,
Amazing.
how do we stop this unstoppable evil? Blood of Christ.
Blood of Christ. Yeah, like actual literal, not just some wine that changes in your mouth, but quite
Right.
literally.
Not magic happy juice. No.
Right. Yeah, like
Actual
literally.
blood.
And so you did start to get some moments like that where, okay, yeah, like did it kind of come off the rails? Were they running low on ideas at that point? Yeah, maybe. But they did establish just so many other things that were good. But man, yeah, just that act 3, I do think is when it started to fall apart, because we did start to get kind of these like action movie sequences
Mhm.
almost. And like I said, that whole thing was straight National Treasure Indiana Jones with finding the thing. And like we said, no, this movie's not perfect. There are definitely some things that you can kind of pick out here and there.
Mhm.
When she puts the blood in her mouth, as we eventually learn,
What a
and spits
fantastic
it into,
moment.
that was wonderful.
Yeah.
The problem was, in between seeing that the cross was empty and her spitting, there's an entire scene where her mouth is open underwater, right? So you've got to assume that the blood didn't just stay in there at that point, right? Like, and yeah, that's nitpicky stuff, but hell, that's part of what we do here too, right? Is
Yeah.
is you look for those little things. So that one kind of got me, and I'm not going to say it completely pulled me out of it, because like you said, up until this point I didn't know what to expect. So yeah, sure, let the statue of Mary point the way. It definitely didn't pull me out, but just
Right.
if we're referencing kind of other types of movies that were happening here, that definitely got real Indiana Jones there
Yeah.
towards the end.
It did. And I'm never one to complain about having, that sort of Indiana Jones, National Treasure, romancing the stone, Tomb Raider thing going on. And I always want more adventure in everything.
Oh yeah, dude. I've played every Uncharted game and watched the movies. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love all of that. Yeah, let's solve the puzzles and find the lost city of El Dorado, or whatever we're happen to
Right.
be looking for this time. I'm here for it.
And the thing is that a lot of like Catholic doctrine is like that, where it's like there's so much like smoke and mirrors when it
Right.
comes to Catholicism. It's like, why do we do this? It's like, because a couple of guys all dressed in white decided that we did so many years ago. And why did
Dan
they decide that? Well, I don't know. We
Dan
just say,
Brown's got an entire career based off of it.
and Angels and Demons really is just Indiana Jones meets the Catholic Church meets horror, you
Right.
know, or more horror than Indiana Jones already is, because Indiana Jones is horror light,
Oh
you
yeah.
know.
He rips a dude's beating heart out. Like, let's
Yeah,
go.
so you heard it here first. Temple of Doom will be on Shiver. um, to me, I think that part of why the Catholic and religious setting overall, but I think Catholicism in general, or Catholicism specifically, is because of how clandestine a lot of Catholicism is. A lot of it is so steeped in secrecy, and it's like, unless you're part of the club, you don't know what's going on here. Um, I know that that's true of other religions as well. Leonard Nimoy spoke about that, about, being a boy and going to temple and, opening his eyes in a part that he shouldn't have opened his eyes. And that's where, the live long and prosper sign comes from. 'Cause
Right.
He saw that happening in the synagogue. He was like, oh, I didn't know what that was. And I got scared and I closed my eyes again. To me, that's part of why this makes such a great setting. And, for me, I don't know if Demaim Bachir or Taissa Farmiga are Catholic. I don't know if, James Wan is Catholic, if anyone involved in this movie is Catholic, but they got the vibe. And you know, as at least as far as I know, and I am fairly well versed in, you know, Catholic teaching, there's a lot of it that is like on point. Um, it's a lot of the reason why I don't consider myself Catholic anymore because of all that stuff. But it's still there in the back of my mind. Like I know it all. I could probably go on Jeopardy and do pretty well if this was the subject. And they got it and they wove it into a story in a way that for me felt natural. To me, that's part of why this story works so well.
Right. And so, you know, I mentioned as I was talking about story, the fact that while it is paper thin, what we rely on here is the performances of the actors involved. So in a section that we're calling clergy and lay people, I want you to take me through some of the characters in this movie, man. Like who sticks out for you? What did you like? Who did you like? Who felt like they phoned it in?
You know, I don't feel like anyone phoned it in. And that's weird to say of a movie that I think is good but not great.
Right.
The performances I don't think were ever an issue for me. Um, I will say that everything that happened in the town was fantastic, and I think that the people that played the townspeople were just so damn good. They felt real, they felt alive in their own dreamscape way because
Right.
they don't feel like people, but they also don't feel like caricatures. They just are in a weird way. Um, but as far as like you know the big name characters, um, I'm gonna go with one that I mentioned briefly, but Gabrielle Downey, who plays the abbess, and I'm pretty sure that she's just doing the voice.
Right.
Um, wow, there's something about that voice. It's so gravelly. It's so um ancient sounding. And you know,
Yes.
she is clearly old, but wow, what she can do with her voice, like to me, I don't think anything terrified me quite as much as her voice. And you know, the way that whoever played her, and I think the actress who was like in the costume, her name was Alma Nicole Boigenou. I think that's
Better
who
than
that
I can do
was.
it.
Um, Fantastic job. You know, that combination of like the physicality of the performance, which was not at all something that was physically demanding, but it was something that was very precise in the way it was done. You know, I think of it almost like it's very easy to say like Eddie Van Halen or like Randy Rhoads are incredible guitar players because they play so fast and so clean. And yes, that's true. But then you look at someone like David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, you know, and you listen to that solo from Comfortably Numb, and there's no speed to it at all. It's just every note is just right. And
Yeah.
that's what that performance was to me. Every movement was so perfectly synced to the voice. Every movement was perfect to build tension. And that character for me is walking away this second time, like far and away, I think the one that stands out the most to me. I
Yeah.
don't know about you.
I mean, look, I would be remiss to not open up by just saying how brilliant the casting of Thaisa Farmiga was in
Oh
this.
yeah.
I mean, one, she's established scream queen at this point. You know, reoccurring roles on American
Mhm.
Horror Story. You know, she's out there doing it, so we know she's got the scary chops. But damn, it was so perfect because she looks just like a younger version
Of
of her
Vera.
sister. Yeah,
Yeah.
she looks like Vera, just younger, you know, and they're separated by what, like 18, 20. Like
Many
there's a
years.
big
Yeah.
age gap.
Mhm.
But so without saying it, you kind of establish that this is part of Lorraine Warren's history by just
Right.
casting Thaisa Farmiga in this role and having her look just like Vera looks playing Lorraine Warren. So I thought that that was great, just casting. But then also, I mean, she went and did the damn thing.
Yeah.
She plays scared so convincingly. But then it's also still convincing when she gets her final girl ultimate badass moments.
Mhm.
And that was something that we would see in sections, when you were watching an American Horror Story. You go back to Murder House and you caught her as just the damsel in distress, but then you go forward 2 seasons into Coven and she is that bitch, right? Like she is not to be fucked with. In this movie, we got her realistically and believably portraying both of these roles. We watch her go from, oh, but I haven't taken my vows yet, and why me, to like, all right, let's do this shit. Give me my vows. Let's go. We're saving the world. Like, we see that progression, and it was believable in everything that she gave us out of that performance. I thought that she was just brilliantly casted. I enjoyed seeing her in that role. That scene when she's praying, when who's it, Ruth, I think, or Irene, like grabs her, like, the only thing you can do is pray. Just don't look. No matter what happens, you look forward and you pray. That the look in her face is she was so terrified, but so determined that she was going to stick this out and she was going to win. That moment for me cemented the fact that I could believe wherever she was going forward with this role, because she was no longer just tame damsel in distress. She wasn't just my girl Friday to Father Burke's, big bad hero. She established herself in that moment as an equal part of the team. And as we come to find out, a more important part to an extent, because, she was ultimately what was the final barrier in stopping Valak from getting free and taking over the world. And it was, I didn't feel Mary Sued about it at all. I felt like the way that she portrayed that character and the way the story progressed, when she did become ultimately badass at the end, I felt like it was deserved for everything that she had done, learned, and been through until that moment. So combination of her performance and that character arc, I think, led to Sister Irene's part being amazing, and Taissa Farmiga just was perfect in that role.
Yeah, she's been like fucking. I've been obsessed with her. So I think the first thing I saw her in was the show
American Horror Story.
American Horror Story. Yeah, and you're right. Well, she was very much a passive character in that first season. That third season, when we see her character in that last shot, and she's using her power to like get back at people, I'm like, yeah, that's fucking badass. And then Final Girls, which we've seen before, and done on this show, like she, I think, continues to show that she is someone who you watch. When you see that she's in a movie, it's like, okay, I want to watch this thing now. And I think they did a good job of establishing her character right from the beginning. When, she asks Father Burke, like, but why me? And he says, well, the Vatican never makes a mistake. And she says, when she's giving him his backstory, she talks about how she survived something like this before. There's a strength in her going back to her childhood. And I think that she does a really good job of like the steely reserve, where it's like, she has this iron will. And I'm glad we got to talk about her, because I love her as an actress. I end up loving every character she plays. There's obviously a magic to her that to me works.
Yeah.
So I think we've mentioned a lot of people. The one that I think we've kind of skirted around a lot is the nun herself, Sister Valak. And she is, as we discussed, one of the most terrifying things about that second Conjuring movie. And now here she is front and center, and she's got the whole movie to terrify us. So what is it about Valak that works for you? And did it work as effectively this time around as it did in Conjuring 2?
And okay, so here's the thing. I because of just where my mindset always is when I'm looking at these two things, I kind of I kind of have a line in the sand that I'm pushing between Valak and the nun, right? Like I get that they're the same person, but I think that's one thing that's real important to kind of remember is that the nun is just the version of Valak that's being presented to us in this movie. I say that to point out just a couple of things. One, I think that the idea of using anytime you use an actual, lesser keys of Solomon dictionary, it's the Infernal Dictionary. I'm not going to try to pronounce it in the foreign language, right? Anytime you actually use one of those demons, then you have to, in my opinion, take the time to kind of establish what they're all about. Now, when you read Lesser Keys, Valak is just kind of mentioned. But what's really interesting is the fact that Valak is actually portrayed as angelic in Lesser Keys and in the Infernal Dictionary. Like cherub-like. I mean, it looks like a child riding a dragon.
Mhm.
So that was weird to me at first. But that notwithstanding, when I look at just Valak presented to us the way it is here as the nun, she's scary as shit. I mean, it's just I think that what's interesting about how scary the nun is some of the things that are never outright said, but that are showed to us that show us how powerful Valak is. I think that one of those things that shows how powerful Valak is the concept of Valak taking the form of a nun in the first place. When you read and you look into some of this stuff, traditionally, a demon, unless it is a very higher order demon, which Valak is not, is named, right? So better than just a minion.
Right.
But I want to say bottom 30 when you're looking at where they're ranked in Lesser Keys of Solomon. But the idea of a demon actually being able to possess and own religious like art garments, right? Just icons of a religious nature, and being able to use those, that displays and demonstrates an immense amount of power, and is something to be terrified of. The fact that it took a hallway full of crosses to keep Valak in that room for so long. The fact that it took a key that we kind of assume must have been blessed or has had the blood of Jesus Cristo placed on it. The way that Valak was contained in this shows how powerful Valak is. Yes, we get the moments where she's just straight force pushing people across the room, right? Just slinging them around, drowning people just unrelentlessly. We get those things, but those did less for me as somebody who reads about this stuff all the time to show how powerful she is than the imagery we're given. And so I loved that. I absolutely loved it. I think that the idea of taking something like this and just completely, it's just straight heresy, right? That a nun could look like this. That's dope. I dig all of that. I do have to say, though, in The Conjuring 2, the nun was very scary, and we got the nun in small doses. I think that when we started to get the nun in larger doses with close-ups and immense amounts of screen time, I think that it kind of came across as they were trying a little too hard to make her look creepy. It got cartoonish at a certain point. She became a caricature of the evil character that we got originally in The Conjuring 2. And so some of the visuals are striking and scary in small glances and fast pans and just a scream. But then when it's like, now I'm going to monologue, it's like, shit, you don't look great,
Right.
And so I think that they leaned real heavily into how creepy she was going to look. And then I think that, like I said, when she started monologuing, it wasn't as effective in the long run as it was in the short. But I do think that there were vulgar displays of power here that were amazing. And I'm not taking anything away from how scary the concept of the nun was. I just think that visually sometimes they tried a little too hard.
I have to agree with this because for me, the scariest thing about this movie was actually the abyss and not the nun. And we got the abyss in 2 scenes. The scenes were long enough and no longer. And I think that is one of the things that worked in her favor, just like how it worked in the favor of Valak in Conjuring 2, like you said. And to me, I think that the scariest thing about her is the visage, is the way that she looks. And once you get over that, once you've seen it, the fright is gone.
Exactly.
Because like you said, there are vulgar displays of power, but ultimately, how much power are we actually seeing? Because none of it really happens. It all seems psychological.
Yes.
Right.
Like she didn't actually tear the cathedral down, or the whatever the main area is there. She didn't actually, tear that apart and create a storm and all that. Was that all happening in Irene's head? Like that type of stuff. Like, yeah, it's all psychological. We might not be seeing, except for, like I said, the couple of force pushes. We maybe didn't actually see that much that was powerful.
Right. It really just is like a battle in the mind, I think. And this is part of where the movie starts to fall apart when you think about it too much, is what actually happens in this movie. Because is the only time we actually physically see Valak at the end of the movie,
Right.
Is that the only time that something is physically happening? The rest of the time, how is she getting out of the room?
Right.
Because we're told that she just needs a vessel.
Yes.
And so that's why the sister, throws herself off the top of the abbey in the first place. That leads to all this, so that there is no vessel for her to leave
right
in. So I think that ultimately it's I think that all you have to do is look to this movie to find out why the Crooked Man never happened.
Right.
Because the Crooked Man was another, I think, ridiculously scary character from that second Conjuring movie, maybe scarier than the Nun. And there was all this talk about how this movie was going to happen. He got his own action figure.
Yeah.
And yet here we are. It's 2023 and we still don't have the Crooked Man, and it doesn't look like it's ever going to happen. And I think it's because this movie did not flop.
No,
it did well enough to get a second. And the second one, by all accounts, has done, at least critically, better than the first one did. But this movie did not flop. It had a budget of $22 million, and its box office gross was $365.5 million.
Right.
So that is a considerable amount of money. But I think that the reaction to the movie, by and large, was not what they were expecting. I think that they were expecting people to absolutely love this movie. They were expecting people to just go gaga over it the way that they did Conjuring 2, and that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that does have to do with the Nun. And even on this second watch, where I'm like, yeah, it's a lot better than I gave it credit for. I still think she's the weak point in this movie.
Well, and horror as a genre is rife with this exact pitfall. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, I don't think it was on this podcast, but I may have mentioned it. But I know for a fact we did it on Rush 4 one time when we talked about sequels to movies that bad sequels to good movies. We did a whole episode about it. And my number one, the main reason I came up with that topic is because Sinister 2 is such a steaming pile. And it's because all of the mystery surrounding Bagul was removed when Bagul becomes a character, like a main character in the movie. You don't need that. You don't need, in this type of movie where it's supposed to be atmospheric and just terrifying all the time. Once the big bad is not just a shadow that you're constantly watching over your shoulders for, once it's a physical being that you can see, then you kind of get into that predator mindset, right? It bleeds, we can kill it. Once you've got a body and something that you can focus on, then it becomes a lot easier to pick it apart. There's not a lot negative to say about the nun from Conjuring 2 because she's there to scare us and then she's gone and we move forward. And the same thing with the first Sinister. Bagul is fucking horrifying because he's just a blurry image in the back of a photograph. He's just a concept that's causing all of these films to be made. But then when you take them and you make them a centerpiece and the mystique is gone, then it's not as scary. And I do think that is a major pitfall that happened with this movie. I think that they were so enamored with people's idea of what the nun was from this one image in the painting, or or these quick moments that we got with her in The Conjuring 2. They were like, yes, this broad can carry a movie. And so they created a scenario in which she had that opportunity. And yeah, what we kind of end up with here is, once she becomes a major player that we're seeing on a regular basis and that mystique is gone, you go, oh man, like everybody else is better than you right now.
Yeah, and I don't think it's her fault, because the actress that plays her, Bonnie Aarons, I think does a fantastic job.
Right.
I think it's just that the character itself is not as compelling a character as they thought that she was. Now, I haven't seen the second Nun. I don't know what, if anything, they've changed about the character. But I think that for the Nun 2 to work, they need to rework Valak.
Oh man, have you seen some of the viral marketing they've done for the Nun 2, where in certain theaters they had women like dressed as nuns but like wearing just pure black face masks, like walk into the theater holding candles and fill empty seats?
Oh shit.
Oh dude, it's fucking horrifying. Like I found a bunch of Instagram reels of a couple places they did it. It was terrifying.
Yeah. I would have lost my mind. To support that point that you were making about screen time, Daniel, I just looked this up. So Christopher Lee as Dracula, in the first of the Hammer Horror Dracula movies, utters 6 lines of dialogue in 9 minutes. That's that's his whole time in the movie that is named after him, right? In the second sequel, because he doesn't appear in the sequel, the Prince of Darkness, he has no dialogue, no lines of dialogue, and appears in 7.5 minutes.
Yeah.
And many people will tell you that that is their favorite of his Dracula movies. I think that it, like, economy of character, the less you see, the more you're scared of it. Think about the Predator. Why does the Predator work so well? You don't even see the Predator until like halfway through the movie. Why does Jaws work so well? You never see the full shark.
You never see him. Yeah.
Never. And granted, was some of that because of technical difficulties? 100%. But did it work better in that way? Even Steven Spielberg will tell you he's glad it happened.
Yeah.
So I really do think that that's part of why Valak for me is the weak point. And I don't think it's a bad character, because she is scary to look at. If I saw someone looking like that walking towards me,
oh yeah,
I would turn the other way.
Yes, sir.
But definitely the weak point of the movie, I think.
Well, and that's just something that's one of the downfalls that comes with loving these things the way that we love them. You once that it becomes that moment where it's like, sometimes I have that thought where I'm like, if I actually met Mothman, I'd probably be disappointed, like because there's just no way he would be as cool as he is in my head, because then it would just be a thing, that's what just basically any cryptid researcher is going to tell you. Like any cryptozoologist, if they're being honest with themselves, one has to admit that if they find the one thing they dedicated their life to, that now their life is meaningless. But they also have to admit that if you have done nothing for 30 years, but look for the Loch Ness Monster and you find her, yeah, sure, there's going to be a lot of fame and a lot of money that comes with that. I'm sure you can monetize the shit out of it. But then also, like, there's no way. There's just no way that when you finally do find the Loch Ness Monster, it's going to be everything that you've built it up into your head to be. And when you've got just a few minutes of Dracula, a few minutes of the Nun, hell, the Godzilla movie, I think he had 7.5, 8 minutes of screen time in the newest versions, in the first one. But that's because they were like, hey, look at all these badass things he does back into the ocean. Now you can just wonder how badass he really is because we just gave you a taste.
And that's something Gareth Edwards understood. Like, he went back to the basics and not the 1997 Godzilla basics. He did not call Matthew Broderick. He looked up the original Godzilla.
Yeah. And so I do think that, like you said, I don't think that there's anything wrong with the character. I just think that the character was not utilized to the fullest of her potential.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, unless there's anything else, we kind of, a couple of miscellaneous things that I did want to kind of throw in before we get to rating. We talked about the atmosphere, and just a couple of things I forgot to mention. The fact that the door where she's locked up says "God ends here" in Latin.
Yeah, that's a great touch.
Fuck yes. Like, that should have been the tagline for this movie. Like, I'm sure people would have been pissed, right? But it probably would have been the good kind of, like, negative publicity, right? Like that,
right.
like Kevin Smith boycotting Dogma himself, like that good stuff where you're like, the Nun, God ends here. Yes, please.
I go see that movie.
Yeah, like that is one where it settles into you just so fast. And there are times when they were perfect with it like that. And then there are times where they just got so kind of ham-fisted with it, like the crucifix slowly turning upside down. Like, I get it. It's an upside down crucifix, And so there's a funny mix of those things in there. Some of them fantastic, some of them just a little bit too on the nose. And so, like I said, I am excited to see The Nun 2 because I want to see if they've kind of tightened some of these things up.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I do want to see it. I had no desire to see it before rewatching this, so I'm glad that you suggested this, because it has opened my eyes, I think, to like the one corner of the Conjuring universe that I was not a fan of.
Right. So without further ado, I mean, it's time for us to rate this thing. If you are new to the show or you just need a quick reminder, as it's been like 4 weeks, we rate a movie only against itself. That means we are not stacking up The Nun against Annabelle movies or anything else from the Conjuring universe. We are only looking at The Nun, what is presented here, and how good of a film we think it is. And in order to preserve that, every movie, we create a unique rating system. Now, you want to know how the sausage is made? We're going to be a little bit honest with you here. Dave and I have both been super busy, and you're going to get the live debating here over what we should how we should rate this movie. So, Dave, do you have any ideas what our metric should be for The Nun?
I have to think that it's Mary's pointing the way.
I love it. It doesn't get more unique than that,
right? That's what I was thinking. I'm like, man, we got to pick something here that we're never going to use again.
There we go. So, Dave, out of a possible 5, Mary pointing the ways, what do you give The Nun?
I think that the right score is 3 3/4 Mary's pointing the way. However, we don't do quarter stars here. And it feels wrong to say that The Nun is 4 Mary's pointing the way. So I think I'm going to go down to 3.5 Mary's pointing the way. And really what it boils down to is that the story doesn't really make an awful lot of sense. I don't care too much that the story doesn't make a lot of sense. And the nun is kind of the weakest character. And in fact, there's another character that is not the main villain that I find scarier.
Right.
So to me, it's kind of like it loses steam somewhere there. Indiana Jones gets thrown in, so I'm okay with it. And I'm never going to complain about having to look at Thaisa Farmiga. I think she's gorgeous. So there you go. 3.5.
I'm just about every step of the way right along with you, because while 3.5 does feel a little bit lower than what I think it deserves, I think that going up to 4 feels like
Wronger.
giving it too much credit. Yeah, it
Yeah.
feels wronger. And so in the idea of saying that this movie did a lot to impress me, but also there are things that I would like to see changed. I would like to see things toned. I would like to see things tightened up. I am going to go down to 3.5 Mary pointing the ways, because that's a good one. Just because it was a fun ride. It was creepy. It was atmospheric. It did all of these things that we've talked about, but it never quite crossed that last little bit, right? That starts to take it up into that 4. Will I talk about this movie positively to people that that want to talk about movies? Yeah, just recently watched The Nun. I think it's a lot of fun. Is it going to be one where I'm going to be like, you have to see this? No. And is that kind of where the 3-4 barrier comes in for me? And I think, yeah. So I'm going to go 3.5 Mary pointing the ways.
Man, I never thought about that. Like, if I feel like I need to talk to someone about this thing that I just saw, that's a 4.
Right.
If I liked it, but I'm not like running to talk to you about this thing, that's somewhere in the 3s, 3 or 3.5.
Like, I feel like 3
like that.
is I would recommend it, but 4 is like I'll recommend it and then I want to talk about it. Like then I want to know, like if it's a 3, yeah, I'll recommend it. Tell me if you liked it or not. Cool, we're good. But I think if once I reach that 4 or 5 mark, it's like, now I need you to call me because we've got to talk about this movie.
Right. Yeah, I'm strapping you into the chair so that you can watch with me. So
yeah,
there you have it.
5 is I'm kidnapping you because we're watching this for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, come into my van. I'll choose which mask I'm watching it with, because we need to see the black phone now.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. So thank you so much for sticking with us. It looks like some of you did, so thank you. And we will be back next week. Will we? Yes, we will be back next week.
Yes. Schedules are getting weird. We know spooky season's coming up. We're going to try to go October without missing a day, even though we both got some trips. We're going to work some things out. But yes, for the foreseeable future, we will be back next week, and we will be hopefully releasing our October lineup soon.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any sort of suggestion about what you think we should do, if there's something new that's coming out, I don't know if Talk to Me is streaming yet.
It is not streaming yet because I have been I've been impatiently waiting for that one to drop anywhere.
Yeah, I want to do that one.
Also, Last Voyage of the Demeter is one that I'm waiting.
Oh yeah, that one I think is streaming.
Okay, yeah, we might have to
so that might be one that I got to pick up on iTunes so that we can do it soon. So on behalf of
wait, hold on before you sign off. If you are not following us on Instagram, but you listen, you need to make sure you head to shiverpod.com, where you will find a new link, because what do we have? We have merchandise, and it's more than just the little logo that you can see up here, which of course you can have put on a coffee mug, a pillow, tapestry, or a t-shirt. But we have some spectacular art that local Tuscaloosa artist Ellie Ray put together for us,
and knocked it out of the park.
Of Dave and I as dueling Frankenstein's monsters that are sewed together, woefully and fearfully made, right?
There we go.
Yeah, you can kind of see it in the background there. We have got some awesome art. You can have it put on anything. We've had a handful ordered. So if you are one of those people who's got one already, thank you so much. They look great. head to shiverpod.com, where you can find links to all of our social media, as well as a link to our TeePublic site where you can pick up that shirt. We'd love to see you have one. Don't forget also, Dave and I are going to be at Spooky Empire next month. So if you are in the Orlando area and you'd like to meet us, that's where you'll find us.
Yeah, in just about 5 weeks.
Yeah.
We will be there. So have some drinks with us at the hotel bar. Come stand in line with us as we stand in line to, meet all our heroes. It's gonna be fun.
It definitely is.
So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, fright you very much.